My name is Ruth Calden. The day my daughter called me just a housemaid was the day everything in my soul turned quiet and sharp. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise an eyebrow. But I made a decision that night. And if you listen closely, you might actually regret missing out on this dramatic story. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now let me take you back to the night that changed everything. It was a Friday. My daughter Brielle had invited some of her coworkers and friends over for a little wine and dine evening. She worked at a marketing agency downtown, some firm where appearances were everything, and titles mattered more than truth. She was 33, well-dressed, articulate, and according to her LinkedIn bio, a self-made leader. But that night, as I carried out the last of the hors d'oeuvres I'd spent the entire day preparing, I heard her laugh a little too loud. "Oh, don't mind her," she said, nodding toward me with a smirk. "She's just the housemaid." The laughter was awkward. Someone coughed. I stood there holding the tray frozen. Brielle didn't even look my way. She turned back to her wine glass, her cheeks flushed with the boldness of someone trying to look clever in front of her peers. I placed the tray down gently on the table. Not a single person at that gathering made eye contact with me. They just sipped their wine and picked at the puff pastries I had rolled baked and served by hand. In that moment, I didn't feel hurt. I felt erased. She had reduced me to something beneath the carpet, something used. A maid, not even with gratitude, but with dismissiveness. That night, after they all left and she went upstairs, I cleaned up the kitchen like I always did. I scrubbed the wine rings from the dining table, soaked the forks, and wiped down the counters. My body moved like muscle memory, but my mind, it was quietly starting to sharpen. Brielle had forgotten who I was. She had forgotten the nights I spent holding her feverish body, rocking her for hours when no one else was there. Forgotten the shoes. I patched the school lunches. I packed the stories I read out loud when I was dead tired from cleaning homes to make ends meet. Yes, cleaning homes. I had been a maid. Not in name, but in love. That kind of labor, invisible as it was, built her life. But now she wore nice shoes and called herself a woman of status. And me, I was background noise. The next morning, she acted as though nothing had happened. She waltzed into the kitchen wearing her robe, grabbed her almond milk latte, and asked what was for breakfast. "Whatever you make," I said, not looking up. She blinked, confused, and gave a little laugh. "Okay, someone's grumpy." I didn't respond. That was the beginning. I didn't plan a grand revenge. No, I planned to return her gift with precision. I planned to let her live exactly as she described me. Like just a housemaid? But first I had to be invisible a little longer. That day I did everything as usual. Cooked, cleaned, folded laundry. But I did it with a silent awareness, watching how she moved, what she assumed, what she expected. It was astonishing how quickly she had grown used to being served. She tossed her jacket on the couch and expected it to vanish into a hanger. She left dishes in the sink and expected them gone by lunch. I wasn't her mother anymore. I was the hired help, except no one was paying me. That night, I wrote a note in my journal. She must learn the cost of what she's erased. You see, revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't need yelling or theatrics. It just needs perfect timing and the courage to let people fall into the holes they've dug for you. I stayed silent. I kept serving, but inside I was already gone. I wasn't always this quiet. In my younger years, I had a laugh that startled people. Loud, full-bellied, honest. My late husband used to say that when I laughed, it could rattle the windows. That version of me had faded over time, not because life had been cruel, but because it had been demanding. I had learned that in order to hold a house together, sometimes you have to put yourself last. When Brielle was 4, her father died in a construction accident. We had just paid off the last bit of hospital debt for her birth, and then boom, gone. I remember folding his shirts for the last time, smelling his scent in the collar, and promising myself one thing: she will never know what it's like to be unsupported. I took that vow seriously. I took in laundry. I cleaned houses for women who never looked me in the eye. I clipped coupons, cooked all meals from scratch. Never bought anything new. I was the mother who skipped meals so her daughter could have a school lunch with a smiley face drawn on the napkin. Brielle always had clean socks, a warm bed, and someone to hold her when she was sad. And I never let her see me cry, not once. So when she started earning her own money, I was proud. When she moved back into the house to save up while looking for her dream condo, I welcomed her with open arms. I thought deep down she'd see this house not as a pit stop, but a sanctuary. But little by little she changed. She started coming home later and later. Her tone clipped her words sharper. She used to say, "Hi, Mom." Then it became, "Hey." Then one day, nothing at all, just the sound of heels clicking past me as I chopped onions for dinner. I didn't protest. I didn't demand affection. I just kept the rhythm of the home. But after that dinner party, something in me cracked. Not out of sadness, but awakening. Brielle's life worked because I worked. I was the scaffolding she never noticed. And now she wanted to paint me over like an old wall. I started observing her even more closely. When she showered, I could time how long until she called down for a towel. When she left dishes out, I watched how long before she noticed they hadn't moved. I even left a sock on the living room floor, hers, to see if she'd pick it up. 3 days. 3 whole days. She didn't even register it. Then I stopped making breakfast. Just once. No eggs, no toast, no smoothie. She walked into the kitchen and blinked at the empty counter. "Nothing today." She asked, eyebrows raised. I shrugged. Didn't feel like it. She hesitated for a moment, then laughed like I'd told a joke. But I could see the flicker of confusion behind her eyes. By day 3, she started opening the fridge with a sigh. "We're out of oat milk," she mumbled. I said nothing. She texted me from upstairs. "Can you grab some? Need it for my morning shake." I replied, "No." A pause. Then, "What?" No answer. That night, I made a single plate of food. Set it down on the table for myself. She came downstairs and stared at it. "Is there more?" "Didn't cook for 2, I said flatly, not even looking up. The silence between us was louder than any argument. You see, I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was giving her a lesson, one she would never forget. She had grown up thinking a home ran on magic. But magic is labor someone else hides. And slowly the machine began to fail. The floors stayed sticky. The laundry stayed damp. The trash began to smell. She started to complain. "It's gross in here," she muttered one day. I nodded. "Yes, it is." By the end of the week, she did something she hadn't done in years. She picked up a broom. But it was too late. I had already decided the next phase would begin soon. I would give her the role she so casually assigned me, but this time she would wear the apron, and I'd be the one holding the wine glass. By the time the second week rolled around, Brielle looked tired, not in the physical way. Her makeup was still impeccable, her hair still styled. Her voice still carried the false confidence she wore so well. But her eyes darted. They searched for the order in the house she once took for granted and found none. She tried to pretend everything was fine, but the cracks were forming. I sat at the table reading a novel as she came downstairs, the scent of unwashed dishes and yesterday's burnt toast still hanging in the air. She didn't even say good morning. She just opened the cabinets, clanked a few mugs, and muttered under her breath, "Are we seriously out of clean cups again?" I flipped a page. "Looks that way." She turned, squinting at me. "You're not even doing anything." I glanced up slowly. "I'm resting." Resting. She said it like it was a dirty word. I didn't respond, because in truth I had stopped doing everything. No cleaning, no cooking, no laundry, no toilet paper replacements, no light bulb changes, no sock pairing, fridge restocking, towel folding. I had stepped out of my invisibility and I stayed out. I let the entropy in. It didn't take long before she started to fall apart. One morning, she came downstairs, late, makeup half done, hair still damp from the shower. She stared at her wrinkled blouse still in the laundry basket where it had sat untouched for 4 days. "Ugh," she groaned. "Did you not do any laundry this week?" "No," I replied, buttering a piece of toast for myself. "Didn't feel like it." She blinked. "You're joking." I shook my head. "You said I'm just the housemaid." I figured maybe the housemaid deserves a vacation. She scoffed. "Oh my God, are you seriously still mad about that?" "Mad." No, I was past mad. I was exact. "It wasn't the words, Brielle," I said, setting down my knife. "It was that you meant them." She paused. I could see her pride battling with her growing discomfort. "Fine. Whatever. I'll just do it myself." And she tried. She tried doing laundry. She tried cooking, burned the rice, undercooked the chicken. She tried cleaning missed corners, used window cleaner on the marble left streaks on every surface. She even tried grocery shopping, came home with 3 bags of snacks, no vegetables and oat milk that expired last week. By Friday, she sat on the couch hair in a messy bun laptop, closed a pile of unfolded laundry around her like a cotton storm. She looked deflated. I sat across from her sipping tea, watching. She broke first. "I didn't mean it like that," she whispered. "What?" "What I said. At the dinner. I was just trying to impress people. You know how it is." I raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" She fidgeted. "I mean, look, I didn't expect you to just stop everything. The house, it doesn't work like this." "No," I said softly. "It doesn't work without me." She went quiet. And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't cruel. She was conditioned. Conditioned to think that love was free labor. That mothers exist in the background, always reliable, always giving, never asking. She didn't even realize what she was taking, because I never made her see it. Until now. "I want to make it right," she said finally. "Just tell me what to do." I smiled gently. "Live in the mess. Learn what it takes." She hesitated. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, standing up, "you'll be the housemaid for a while." Her mouth fell open. "You're kidding." "No," I said calmly. "You called me that. Now you'll wear the title. See how heavy it is." And with that, I handed her the dish gloves and walked upstairs. I could hear her laughter, disbelieving, angry, almost childish. But beneath it I heard fear. Because somewhere in her soul she knew. The foundation had shifted. The apron no longer belonged to me. The next morning I stayed in bed an hour longer than usual. It felt strange at first, not rising at dawn to brew coffee, not sweeping the kitchen tiles before the sun peeked in. I lay under the soft weight of my comforter, listening to the unfamiliar symphony of a house waking without me. Drawers opening and slamming. A kettle screaming on the stove. A soft ouch followed by the clang of something dropped. Then silence. I smiled into the pillow. Downstairs, Brielle was discovering a truth I'd known for decades. That a home is not just walls and furniture. It breathes. It aches. And if no one tends to it, it slowly turns against you. When I finally descended the stairs, she was standing in the middle of the kitchen, a spatula in one hand, a half-burned pancake on a paper plate. She looked up quickly like a child caught drawing on the wall. "Morning," she said, her voice hoarse. I made breakfast. I walked past her, poured myself a glass of water, and sat. The pancake looked like it had survived a small fire. Still, I took a bite. She watched with desperate eyes. I chewed slowly, swallowed, and gave her a faint nod. "It's edible." She exhaled. "That's good." I didn't answer. Instead, I gestured to the overflowing sink behind her. "And what's the plan there?" She turned, as if noticing it for the first time. The stack of dishes teetered like a ceramic mountain, soap scum drying on the rims. "I'll get to it," she muttered, grabbing a towel and wiping the counter instead. "No," I said gently. "You'll get to the sink." Her shoulders tensed. We stood like that for a long moment, me sitting calmly, her trembling slightly, still holding the dishcloth. Then she threw it into the sink and turned around. "This is ridiculous. What is you punishing me like this?" I said I was sorry. I tilted my head. "No, sweetheart. You apologized for what you said, not for what you believed." She flushed. "That's not fair." "No," I said softly. "What wasn't fair was hearing you erase 30 years of love, effort, and care with 5 words. Just a housemaid." "Nay." The silence that followed was brutal. She sat across from me, shoulders hunched now. "I didn't think it would hurt you," she said after a while. "You always seem so unbothered." I let out a breath. "That's because mothers are taught to swallow hurt like it's breakfast. But we're not made of air, Brielle. We bruise too." Her eyes glistened. She wiped them quickly as if embarrassed. "I didn't mean it that way. You're more than that. You're everything." Now we were getting somewhere. But I wasn't ready to lift the weight just yet. "Then show me," I said. She frowned. "You said I'm everything. So start acting like you see it. Pick up what I used to carry." So for the rest of the day she did. She swept, mopped, did 2 loads of laundry, cooked a second meal, burned it again, and ordered takeout in defeat. She even cleaned the bathroom, muttering curses under her breath the entire time. I stayed quiet, sipping tea, reading, folding only my own clothes. At one point, I heard her sigh so deeply it sounded like an exorcism. But I didn't gloat, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about revelation. She had lived in the shelter of my labor for so long that she mistook it for nature. Like houses stayed clean on their own. Like fresh food just appeared in the fridge. Like magic. I was undoing the illusion. That evening, I found her on the couch, curled up, her face smudged with exhaustion. She looked at me with hollow eyes. I don't know how you did this for years. I sat beside her, my hand resting on her knee. Because I loved you. She looked away. I don't deserve that. I said nothing. Because maybe she didn't. But what she needed now wasn't punishment. It was understanding. And that's why I had one final plan. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my silver hair with the slow rhythm of memory. Downstairs, the house was quiet. No television noise. No clicking keyboard. Just stillness and the faint smell of lemon cleaner from Brielle's earlier attempts at scrubbing the tile grout. She was trying. But trying doesn't erase a lifetime of entitlement. And I wasn't ready to hand back comfort so quickly. In the morning, I did something unthinkable. I packed a small bag. Just one, 2 outfits. My medications, a book of poems by Mary Oliver, and my favorite scarf, the one my husband gave me the last Christmas before he died. I left a note on the kitchen table. Don't call. Don't text. I'll be gone for a few days. Take care of the house. And yourself. When I walked out the front door, the sun had just risen. The street was bathed in gold, and the sky was a soft promise. I didn't look back. I didn't go far, just 3 towns over, to a small bed and breakfast run by a retired librarian named Doris. She greeted me with a warm hug and didn't ask why I was there. I spent the first day walking, the second day reading, the third day sleeping in and eating fresh croissants like I didn't owe anyone anything. Because I didn't. Back at the house, I knew Brielle would be flailing. She had no idea where the vacuum bags were, or how to set the washer to rinse twice for her detergent allergy. I didn't leave a manual, because I never had one. She had to learn the way I did, through mess, through fatigue, through necessity. That was the only honest way. On the 4th day, I returned home. When I stepped into the living room, I was greeted not by welcome, but by chaos. Toys scattered everywhere, an overflowing laundry basket, sink full of dishes, the unmistakable smell of something burnt in the trash, and Brielle sitting on the floor back against the couch, her face buried in her hands. She looked up, eyes, puffy lips trembling. You left. I did, I said, simply setting my bag down. Do you know how awful this week has been? I looked around. I can imagine. I couldn't even shower properly. There were no clean towels. The garbage overflowed. I didn't even know we had to clean behind the stove. Who cleans behind the stove? Someone who cares about hygiene, I said calmly. She threw her head back against the couch. I'm not cut out for this. I can't do what you did. I sat beside her slowly. You were never supposed to do what I did. You were supposed to see it, respect it, honor it. She turned toward me. Her voice cracked. I didn't, I thought it just happened. Like you were born knowing how to keep everything running. No, I whispered. I wasn't born knowing. I learned alone because I had to. She stared at her chipped nails, silent. I thought I was grown, she said. I have a degree, a job, a savings account. But I couldn't even keep the toilet from flooding. I looked at her, then not with triumph, but compassion, because I remembered what it felt like to be overwhelmed by the weight of life. I didn't want to hurt you, Mom, she added softly, but I did. I made you feel small. I nodded. You made me feel invisible. And then something shifted. She got up, walked into the kitchen, opened the drawer, pulled out the spare apron, the one with the faded sunflower print she used to wear when she was 5, pretending to help me bake cookies. And she tied it around her waist. She came back and said, I want to know what it takes. I want to earn your forgiveness. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood up, took off my own apron, and placed it on the hook by the door. Then I said, start with the bathroom. The tiles need scrubbing. She nodded, walked off. And I sat down in the sunniest spot of the house with a cup of tea, the Mary Oliver book open on my lap. because the role she assigned to me so carelessly, she was wearing it now, and the lesson had only just begun. I could hear her in the bathroom groaning, gagging, muttering curses at the mildew in the corner of the shower. There's a particular kind of humbling that only comes when you find yourself face to face with a toothbrush in one hand and a toilet brush in the other, trying to decide which battle to fight first. For the first 20 minutes, Brielle scrubbed like she was in a race. Furious, fast, panicked. She even turned up music on her phone to make the task feel less degrading. But there's no way to glamorize cleaning grout. By the hour mark, her speed slowed. I knew exactly what stage she was in, where you realize that no one is going to come in and help. That it won't be over in a few swipes. That your knees ache, your back stings, your patience evaporates. And still no one sees, no one claps. No one says thank you for cleaning the space between the spaces. She emerged around noon, hair frizzed, a sweat stain on her blouse. No snark in her voice. I didn't know bathrooms could take 3 hours, she said. I looked up from my book. That's because someone always cleaned it before it got bad. She sat down at the edge of the couch, hands dangling between her knees. I don't think I've ever cleaned anything properly in my life. That's possible. She looked over, a small smile playing at the edge of her lips. You're enjoying this a little too much. I shook my head. I'm not enjoying your pain. I'm watching your perspective grow. For the next week, I stepped fully out of the rhythm of the home. She did the cooking. Terrible at first, then gradually less so. The laundry, mountainous, damp-smelling Tangled, began to sort itself under her increasingly competent hands. There was one night when I heard her yelling at the dryer, accusing it of eating her socks. I smiled to myself. Ah, the sacred rite of passage. But what struck me most wasn't how she was learning to clean. It was how she was learning to see. She began noticing the small things. The dust behind the microwave. The way dish soap ran out at the worst times. How the windows fogged when it rained and needed wiping to prevent mold. One evening, she knocked on my door. In her hand was a tray, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, a little dry, and peas slightly overcooked. She had placed a cloth napkin and even lit a candle. For you, she said, because I finally understand what it takes to do this. I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, saw not just a woman crumbling under shame, but rebuilding. I took the tray. Thank you. She lingered. Also, I made a list. A list. A spreadsheet, actually. She pulled out her phone. Of what needs to be done in the house. Daily, weekly, monthly. I thought maybe we could share it. I blinked. You want to split the work? She nodded. I know now it's not your job. It never was. And that moment, quiet, no spotlight, meant more than any apology. Because it wasn't about equality. It was about recognition. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the air cool against my skin. I looked back through the window at Brielle, now folding towels the right way finally and humming to herself. I thought about the years I spent picking up after her life, believing that motherhood meant self-erasure. That love was service invisible and silent. But now I knew better. Love, true love, is not service without thanks. It's not martyrdom. Love is teaching people how to see you, to value the invisible, to lift with you, not just be carried. And maybe, just maybe, she was learning that. By the second week of her housemaid rotation, Brielle had stopped complaining. That in itself was a miracle. She no longer stomped down the stairs demanding almond milk or barked questions about why we didn't own a Roomba. She no longer scowled at unwashed dishes as if they'd appeared by magic or muttered passive-aggressively about how this house is falling apart. Instead, she moved with quiet effort. No drama, no applause. I watched from the periphery as she loaded the dishwasher with precision-paired socks with near reverence, and even began meal prepping on Sundays, something I had begged her to try for years. But what touched me most was the transformation, not in her hands, but in her eyes. She looked at me differently now. Not through the lens of expectation, but of understanding. She didn't just see her mother anymore. She saw the woman who had built a world brick by brick, hour by unpaid hour. That understanding showed itself one rainy Thursday afternoon. I was curled up in the armchair by the window blanket over my lap, watching the droplets race each other down the glass. Brielle entered quietly and sat beside me. She held something in her hand. It was a photo album. Old cloth bound, its edges softened by time. "I found this in the attic," she said. I opened it slowly. Inside were decades of moments. Her first steps, birthday cakes. I'd stayed up all night baking handwritten notes from her childhood that said things like, "I love you more than pancakes." She flipped a page and paused. It was a photo of me, hair frizzy, shirt stained with formula, rocking her as a baby while balancing a phone between my ear and shoulder, a basket of laundry beside me. "I didn't know this photo existed," she whispered. I smiled. "I didn't either. Your father must have taken it." She studied it. "You look so exhausted." But I was happy too. "You were my everything." Her eyes welled. "I took all of it for granted, didn't I?" I reached over and placed my hand on hers. "You were a child. That's what children do. But you're not a child anymore." She looked at me then, not with guilt, but reverence. "I've been thinking," she said, "about moving out." I felt something twist in my chest, but I said nothing. "I want to make space for you to rest. Not just for a weekend, but fully." I studied her carefully. "What brought this on?" She exhaled. "Because I realized I was never a roommate. I was a tenant in a place I never paid rent for, not with money, not with gratitude. And now I think it's time to build my own space." I nodded slowly. "And what will you carry with you from here?" She smiled softly. "Everything I used to ignore." Later that day, she started packing. And I started letting go. Not of her, but of the identity I had worn for too long. The housemaid, the cleaner, the meal prepper, the silent supporter. I was something else now. Something more. The following weekend, we loaded her boxes into a rented van. She had found a small apartment across town, bright with natural light, and a modest kitchen she now respected deeply. Before she left, she hugged me tightly. Not the rushed, distracted hug she used to give, but a full-bodied embrace that said, "I see you. I love you. I'm sorry. Thank you." As the van pulled away, I stood on the porch with the sun warm on my cheeks. I was alone in the house again. But for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own home. I felt seen. And more than that, I felt free. Free to start a life not built around service, but self. What that looked like, I didn't know yet. But the silence, it wasn't emptiness. It was possibility. I spent the first few days alone reacquainting myself with my own rhythms. It's strange how a quiet house reveals the volume of your thoughts. How every creak of the floorboard, every tick of the clock, becomes a conversation you didn't realize you needed to have with yourself. The first morning I brewed coffee the way I liked it, extra strong with a hint of cardamom. I sat by the window in my robe, cradling the warm mug, watching the neighborhood wake up. There was no one to cook for, no laundry calling my name, no lists demanding completion, just me, and the strange, liberating truth that I no longer owed my every breath to someone else's comfort. That day, I wandered into the spare room, once a storage space, then Brielle's makeshift walk-in closet. I spent the afternoon clearing it out. Box by box, I sorted through the artifacts of other people's lives. Brielle's high school trophies, a broken yoga mat, a blender she never used. By sundown, I stood in the middle of the empty room and made a decision. This would be my room, not for guests, not for storage, for me, a room that didn't have to serve anyone else. The next morning, I drove to the fabric store. It had been years since I touched a sewing machine, but something inside me itched. I used to sew clothes for Brielle when she was little. Tiny dresses with crooked seams, Halloween costumes that barely held together. But I loved it. Creating something from nothing. I bought floral fabric, soft linen, a deep teal thread that reminded me of the ocean. I didn't know what I would make yet, but I felt alive holding it. Later that week, I painted the walls of my new room a gentle almond cream. I moved in an armchair, a bookshelf, a small writing desk. I put up a photo of my husband, a candle that smelled like cinnamon and cedar, and hung the apron I no longer wore like a retired uniform. Not as a rejection, but as a quiet ceremony, a chapter closed. Meanwhile, Brielle called. Not every day, but often enough to remind me she was trying. The first call was about groceries. What's the difference between baking soda and baking powder? She asked, frantic. I put the wrong one, and now my banana bread tastes like cement. I laughed. You'll remember next time. Another time she called about bleach stains, then light bulbs, then taxes. I never mocked her, but I never rushed in to fix things either. She had to earn her independence, and she was, slowly, one quiet disaster at a time. One afternoon she came over with a gift, a cloth-covered box hand-tied with twine. Inside were three things: a framed photo of me holding her as a baby, a handwritten letter titled, "To the Woman I Never Truly Saw," a brand new apron deep navy embroidered at the hem with gold thread that read, "Matriarch." I traced the stitching with my fingers, then looked at her. She was crying. I'm still learning, Mom, but I see you now. All of you. And I'm so sorry I ever made you feel small. I opened my arms and she melted into them. We stood there swaying gently, mother and daughter, not in roles but in recognition. I whispered into her hair, "It's not too late to be different." She pulled back, nodding. And for the first time, I knew the girl I raised was still in there. She had just needed to clean off the dust of her own ego to find her way back. That night we cooked together. She sliced the onions. I stirred the pot. And when the meal was done, she did the dishes without being asked. I sat back, feet up, a smile tugging at my lips. She had called me a housemaid, but now she understood. I had been the architect, the foundation, the soul of the home. And maybe she was starting to build one of her own. A week later, I received an invitation. It was handwritten, slid under my door early one morning, the envelope pale lavender, my favorite color. Inside, on thick cream paper, Brielle had written, "You are cordially invited to dinner at the residence of Brielle Calden, prepared, plated, and presented by yours truly. Dress code. Whatever makes you feel like the queen you've always been." I chuckled. Her handwriting still curled at the ends like the teenage notes she used to pass in class. I arrived that evening dressed in a deep burgundy blouse and the earrings I hadn't worn in a decade, tiny rubies, a gift from my late husband. Brielle greeted me at the door with a cloth napkin draped over her forearm like a butler from a 1950s film. "Madame," she said with an exaggerated bow, "your table awaits." I burst out laughing. "You're ridiculous." She grinned. "But I'm trying." The table was beautifully set. Candles flickered at either end, and in the center sat a modest meal: lemon herb chicken, roasted vegetables, and a small bowl of wild rice. She even made a simple dessert: chocolate mousse in tiny glass cups. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was plated like the photos she'd seen on Instagram, but it was genuine. And it was hers. We ate slowly. She asked about my week, my sewing, even the new plants I'd potted in my windowsill. Not once did she glance at her phone. When dessert was cleared, she poured tea into porcelain cups. My old set, the one I used to save for special guests. Tonight she treated me as one. We sat in that glow for a while, sipping, saying little. Then she broke the silence. "I was talking to my therapist." I raised an eyebrow. "Yes, I started therapy." "Don't look so shocked." I smiled. "Proud of you." She said I had what's called inherited blindness. That sometimes we don't see the people closest to us because we think we already know them. And when you're a child, your parents are just functions, not people. I let that sink in. It was true. To her, I had been a lunch packer, a sock finder, a dinner maker, a warm place to land, but not a person with dreams, pain fatigue, or longing. "I never asked who you were outside of being my mom," she said quietly. "I just consumed you." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You were a child. You don't owe me guilt. You owe me growth." She nodded. "I want to know you. For real? Not just the parts that served me." I didn't cry, but something in me softened like a knot being untied. For years I had moved through life like steam rising from a boiling pot, always working, always present, but invisible. Now I was seen, not just as a mother, but as Ruth, the woman who loved jazz, the woman who once dreamed of opening a cafe, The woman who still knew how to dance barefoot in her kitchen when no one was watching. That night before I left, she hugged me long and tight. "Thank you for letting me grow even when I didn't deserve the chance," she whispered. I kissed her temple. "That's what mothers do. But we're not infinite." She pulled back. "I know that now." As I drove home, I looked at the sky, a deep indigo canvas dotted with stars, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes when everything is quiet, but the kind that arrives when someone finally hears the song you've been humming all your life and starts to hum along. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. I received a call from Mrs. Lindstrom, an old friend from my book club. Her daughter was getting married, and she was looking for someone to bake a batch of rustic apple tarts for the small garden reception. "I remembered your pies," she said. "Nothing from a bakery ever matched the way yours tasted." "Still making them." I hesitated. Not because I wasn't, but because no one had asked me that as a compliment in years. "Yes," I replied. "Still making them." "Well then," she chuckled. "How about we put your hands back to magic? I'll pay whatever's fair." I smiled. "No need to overpay, Evelyn. But I'll do it. With pleasure." I baked the tarts over the course of 3 days. Not just one type, but 3 apple lavender brown sugar cinnamon and cardamom pear. My kitchen smelled like warmth and memory, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't cooking out of obligation. I was creating. When Brielle stopped by that weekend and saw the full counter of pastries, her eyes went wide. "Mom, are you catering a royal banquet?" "Just a wedding." "You're seriously doing this for someone else?" someone asked. I replied carefully, brushing glaze over a cooling tart. "And they meant it." She paused, then leaned against the counter. "You know," she said slowly, "I've been thinking." I looked up. "I want to invest in something. With you." My brow lifted. "Me?" She nodded. "I've been saving up to buy a condo, but the idea of contributing to something that makes you shine feels better." I chuckled. "Are you saying you want to go into business with your mother?" She grinned. "Only if you'll have me. I'm thinking Ruth's hearth. Home-baked goods with a story in every bite." I was stunned. Not because of the idea, but because she saw me as something worth investing in. Not as labor, not as support, but as vision. As legacy. "Let's start small," I said. "One market stall, just to test the waters." She nodded eagerly. "Already looking up permits." Later that night, I sat on the porch, notebook in hand, sketching out recipes. I realized I hadn't dreamed like this in years. It had always been enough to make others' lives easier, to clean, cook, and support. But now something was unfolding, something mine. And even better, something shared. The first Sunday we opened our little booth at the local farmers market, we sold out by noon. I wore my embroidered apron, matriarch stitched at the hem. Brielle handled the money, the orders, the customers. She spoke of me not as her help, but her partner. Her teacher. "Best apple tart I've ever had," one woman said, licking sugar from her thumb. "What's your secret?" I smiled. "Patience," I said. After the rush, Brielle turned to me, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. "I haven't felt this alive in years." "You're not the only one," I replied. We sat under our little booth's striped awning, sipping lemonade, laughing like old friends. And I realized something. Revenge doesn't always have to end in bitterness. Sometimes it ends in transformation. What began as a role reversal became something greater. A restoration of identity, of voice, of love. Brielle didn't just return the apron. She returned respect. And I didn't just reclaim my time. I reclaimed myself. The following week, we received a message through our new Instagram page. It was from a woman named Caroline, mid-30s, mother of 2, living just a few neighborhoods over. She wrote, "Your story moved me. I saw your post about the Housemaid story and I just cried in the car. I've been feeling invisible in my own home. Your tarts brought back the scent of my grandmother's kitchen. I want to support you. Please tell me how I can." I read the message aloud to Brielle as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table preparing dough for the weekend market. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then quietly she said, "You're becoming a lighthouse." "A what?" "A lighthouse," she repeated. "You're standing tall and shining, showing other women the way home to themselves." I didn't know how to respond to that, but her words stayed with me. That weekend, we added a small card to each pastry box, made with dignity, for every woman who ever felt invisible. The business grew faster than either of us expected. By month's end, we were receiving custom requests for weddings, retirements, even a teacher appreciation brunch. Brielle, with her marketing background, designed a clean logo, opened a small website, and started booking orders weeks in advance. But amidst all the excitement, I stayed grounded, because I knew this wasn't about fame or even money. It was about reclaiming a narrative. I'd been called just a housemaid. And now my hands were known for healing, for love baked into layers of butter and flour. One afternoon, we were invited to speak at a local women's collective. The theme was reclaiming the roles that raised us. I told our story in simple words to a room full of women, some older, some younger, all with the same weary glint in their eyes. I watched as heads nodded, as hands wiped away quiet tears. And when it was over, Brielle stood beside me holding up the navy apron. This, she said, used to be my mother's symbol of silence. Now it's her crown. There was applause. Some even stood. But what mattered most wasn't the noise. It was the women who came up to me afterward and whispered, "Thank you." One woman said, "I haven't been thanked for dinner in 17 years. Another added, "My daughter thinks my value stopped when I stopped earning a salary." I listened. I hugged them, because I had lived their ache. But I also now lived their hope. At home, Brielle began setting small rituals. Every Sunday, she made us breakfast, nothing fancy, but always thoughtful. She learned how I liked my eggs. She bought me the loose-leaf tea I once mentioned in passing. She even cleaned the bathroom before I noticed it needed doing. One evening, I walked past her room and noticed something new on her nightstand. It was a photo of the two of us at the market booth. Both of us laughing, wind in our hair, matching aprons dusted with flour. That photo used to be a rarity. Now it was reality. And then something I didn't expect happened. Brielle handed me a folded brochure. It read, "Local Community Center, Adult Enrichment Courses." Inside, she had circled one, "Creative Writing for Women Over 60. Telling your story." I looked at her confused. "You used to write," she said. "I found some of your old notebooks. Before Dad passed. Before life got too loud. I haven't written in years. That's exactly why you should." I stared at the page, and something deep inside me stirred. Not everything I loved had to be boxed up in sacrifice. Some dreams could be reawakened even after 70. That night, I signed up, and in the morning, I wrote my first line in decades. "My name is Ruth Calden. I raised a daughter. I ran a home, but I also survived silence, and now I'm learning to speak again." The first day of the writing class, I was terrified. I stood outside the community center's side entrance, clutching a spiral notebook to my chest like a schoolgirl. It had been decades since I had stepped into a classroom that wasn't for someone else's benefit, decades since I had done anything purely for myself. Inside, a circle of women, most with silver hair and gentle smiles, welcomed me without question. The instructor, a soft-spoken woman named Judith, opened with a simple prompt. "Write about a room in your house that no one else understands." And just like that, the words began to flow. I wrote about my old kitchen, how it wasn't just a place to cook, but a cathedral of sacrifice. I wrote about the laundry room, how the hum of the dryer became my only applause. And I wrote about my bedroom not as a retreat, but a space where I once cried silently into a pillow, never letting my daughter hear the sound. When I finished reading aloud, the room was quiet. Then Judith said, "You didn't just write a room, you wrote a life." For the first time in years, I felt seen, not for what I'd done, but for who I was. And something shifted in me. That night, I came home glowing. Brielle noticed immediately. "You look like someone just gave you good gossip and a piece of cake," she teased. I laughed. "Close enough. I wrote something, and people listened." She looked at me with such warmth, I nearly broke down. "I'm proud of you, Mom." And she meant it. Not out of guilt. Not out of recovery, but out of genuine admiration. We sat at the table sharing leftover lemon scones from the market, and she asked, "Do you think you'll keep writing?" I think I said I've only just started. Over the next month, I wrote daily. Little essays, poems, reflections. Sometimes just a line or two. Other times, pages. I began documenting not just my journey, but the untold stories of women like me, the invisible laborers, the matriarchs mislabeled as burdens, the housemaids who had in truth built kingdoms out of crumbs and quiet. And Brielle, she became my first reader. She would stop by in the evenings, sit at the counter with a mug of tea and listen as I read aloud. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she just held my hand across the table and whispered, "I'm so sorry I ever made you feel small." One evening, after a particularly raw piece about the day her father died and how I'd had to go back to work the next morning, she sat quietly for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't know. I never asked." "You weren't supposed to," I said, "but you're asking now." And that made all the difference. As spring rolled in, we decided to expand our market booth. We printed my writing onto cards. Tiny reflections and quotes tied with twine to every pastry box. Each one carried a piece of the story. One read, "A clean house is a mother's love made visible." Another, "Don't call her just a housemaid. She's the spine of your memory." Customers began asking for the cards as much as the treats. One woman said, "These remind me of my grandmother. I didn't thank her enough." And that was the heart of it all, wasn't it? We weren't just selling pastries. We were passing out quiet reckonings. Brielle started bringing friends to the booth, other women who had complicated relationships with their mothers, their roles, themselves. Some were healing, some weren't ready yet, but they came. They listened. They bought tarts wrapped in stories. And I saw it, my daughter standing beside me, not as the woman who once mocked my labor, but as the woman who now honored it, protected it, amplified it. Sometimes I caught her looking at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Her eyes would soften just a little, as if seeing me again for the very first time. And this time, she didn't look away. By late spring, something began to shift in the community around us. Women, mothers, grandmothers, even college students started gathering at our booth, not just to buy pastries, but to talk about burnout, about invisibility, about the constant giving and the aching silence that followed. One woman, perhaps in her 50s, stood at the booth, holding a lavender tart, eyes misted. "My daughter sent me here," she said. "Told me your story made her cry. She never cries." I nodded. She said, "She understands me better now." That moment undid me a little. Not because of the compliment, but because our quiet, personal storm was becoming a mirror for others. The wound I had once tried to bandage with obedience was now helping someone else find voice. We decided to create a new offering, Letters to the Invisible Women. Customers could write a short note to their mothers, grandmothers, or caregivers, anything unsaid. We'd print each letter on a card and tie it to our boxes the following week. Anonymous, free, no branding. The first week we received 3. By the third week we had over 30. One read, "I'm sorry for rolling my eyes every time you folded my clothes. I didn't realize you were folding your heart." Another, "You were never just the maid. You were the rhythm of my life. And I miss you every day." And tucked at the bottom of the stack was a small envelope with no handwriting on the outside. Inside, "Mom, I finally understand. You weren't keeping the house clean. You were keeping me whole." Brielle read that one in silence. Then she whispered, "That could have been from me." I touched her shoulder. It was. One weekend, a girl in her 20s approached our booth holding her phone up. "Can I interview you?" she asked. "I'm doing a documentary project on unseen labor." I hesitated, but Brielle nodded. "She's ready." We sat on a bench near the booth. She turned on the camera and asked, "How did this all start?" I looked at the lens. "It started with being erased," I said, "and deciding not to stay gone." The interview went viral. Within a week, we were featured in a local newspaper under the headline, "From Housemaid to Hearthmaker: How One Mother and Daughter Changed the Narrative." And still I remained steady, because fame wasn't the goal. Visibility wasn't the prize. The real reward was that every week my daughter and I woke up to bake something together. Not just food, but meaning. One morning, as we prepared dough together in the early light, Brielle said, "You know, you taught me how to be a woman. Not by lectures, but by love." I looked up. "But for years," she continued, "I thought strength meant independence. That asking for help made me less. That staying home made you lesser." And now, I asked, now I know strength is in the quiet things. In waking up every day and choosing to give even when no one claps. She brushed flour off my shoulder gently. I see now. You weren't just surviving. You were building legacy. And for once, I had no words. Only breath. Only presence. Later that afternoon, as the market crowd thinned, a young mother approached with a toddler tugging at her skirt. She looked exhausted, eyes tired, shoulders heavy. That soft, familiar ache I recognized in an instant. I don't even know what to say, she murmured. I just needed to be here, needed to feel like someone else gets it. I placed a still warm tart in her hands, then added a card that read, "To the one who wakes before the world, thank you. Your labor is love. We see you," she cried, quietly, gratefully, and I realized what started as a silent protest had become a sanctuary, not just for me, but for all the women who had ever been called just anything. The summer breeze arrived early that year, sweeping through the town like a quiet sigh. The days grew longer, and so did the lines at our booth. But something else began growing too, something less visible, but far more sacred. My relationship with Brielle had shifted from transactional to intentional. She no longer came to me only with questions or needs. She came to sit, to talk, to laugh, to listen. One morning, I woke to the smell of cinnamon and clove drifting through the kitchen. I walked in barefoot and bleary-eyed to find Brielle at the stove humming. "You're up early," I said. She turned with a grin. "Thought I'd surprise you. Apple spice scones today. And don't worry, I use the good butter." I laughed and poured myself a cup of coffee, watching her move. She'd once stumbled through boiling pasta. Now she diced apples with confidence, folding dough like it was second nature. Not perfect, but intentional? And I realized it wasn't the cooking itself. It was the care. Later that afternoon, we received a delivery. A large box, no return address. Inside, a hardcover book. The title embossed in gold read, "The Invisible Matriarch, Essays from the Quiet Heart." It was a proof copy from the community center's writing program. My instructor Judith had compiled our class writings and submitted them for publication. I flipped to the index and found my name. Page 37, The Apron Hook. I read my own words again, tears welling for the 100th time. She called me a housemaid. But that title does not define the woman who held generations together with hands covered in flour. I wore an apron, yes, but I also wore armor. And one day I took it off, not in defeat, but in reclamation. Brielle held the book like it was glass. "Mom," she whispered, "you're an author. I suppose I am." She pulled out her phone, already posting a picture to our shop's page. The caption read, "The woman who fed me, raised me, and now inspires hundreds. Meet Ruth Keldon, baker, writer, and queen of quiet revolutions." I felt something blossom in my chest that day. Not pride, not even joy, belonging. Not as an accessory to someone else's life, but as the author of my own. That weekend at the market, a group of college students approached us. One of them, barely 20, hair-dyed cobalt blue, handed me a folded note. Inside, "Your story helped me forgive my mom. She worked 3 jobs and I used to resent her for being tired. Now I just want to thank her." Another student chimed in. "We started a study circle, reading your essays, talking about our moms. It's become something sacred." I looked at them, stunned. Brielle nudged me. "You've started a movement." I shook my head. "No, dear. We've started a remembering," because that's what this was. A collective remembering of women like me who were always there, always giving, always unnoticed. Now we were not only remembered, we were named. That night we hosted a small gathering in my backyard. Just women, some mothers, some daughters, some both. We sipped tea under string lights, passed around stories, and read aloud from the book. We laughed. We wept. We sat in silence that didn't feel empty but earned. At one point, Brielle stood holding her cup like a microphone. "I used to think my mom was born to serve," she said. "Now I know she was born to lead. Quietly, fiercely. And I'm proud to follow in her shadow even as I build my own path." She turned to me. "Thank you for not giving up on me. For showing me what power really looks like." I didn't need to respond, Because in that moment, surrounded by women holding space for one another, I felt it. Not victory, not vengeance, but vindication. And it was more than enough. The final day of the summer market arrived with soft sun and a hint of fall in the breeze. Our booth, once a folding table with a gingham cloth and two nervous hands, had grown into a centerpiece of the community. People came not just for the pastries but for the cards, the warmth, the conversation. Some called it the story stand, others, the healing table. I called it home. That morning, Brielle surprised me with something new, a wooden sign etched by hand. Ruth's hearth, where every bite tells a story. She hung it above the booth while I arranged the last of the peach hand pies. The wood caught the sunlight like it had been waiting for it all season. As customers trickled in, I caught familiar faces. The tired young mother who now smiled more easily. The blue-haired student, Mrs. Lindstrom. Even Judith, my writing instructor, who winked as she took a card and tucked it into her purse like a love letter. But what marked this day wasn't the crowd. It was Brielle. She moved differently now, rooted present it. When a customer complimented the scones, she didn't redirect it toward me. She simply said, "Thank you. We made them together." She had learned the language of shared credit, of gentle pride, and I had learned to receive it. At the end of the day, after the crates were packed and the booth was folded down, we sat on the grass behind the stalls, shoes off, sipping lemonade from paper cups. "Do you remember," Brielle asked, "the night I called you a housemaid?" I nodded. I remember the silence that followed more. She turned to me. "I want you to know I don't carry guilt anymore. I carry awareness." "That's all I ever wanted," I said. "For you to see." We sat for a long while watching the last of the sun spill behind the trees. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a new apron. This one was deep forest green, stitched with gold thread. A single word across the chest. "Author." "For the next chapter," she said, smiling. "Where you stop being a background character in your own life." I took the apron in my hands, feeling the weight of it heavier than the last, but in a different way. This one wasn't for labor. It was for legacy. "Will you be okay without me in the kitchen every morning?" I asked gently. She laughed. "Mom, I've got this. You taught me well." And I believed her. Because this wasn't just a daughter who had learned to fold towels and boil pasta. This was a woman who had faced herself, her biases, her blindness, her buried gratitude, and chosen transformation. That evening back home, I hung the new apron beside the navy one that said matriarch. And next to those, I placed the very first one, the pale cotton apron with the faded sunflower, the one I had worn for 30 years without thanks. Not as a relic, but as a monument, a quiet testament to a life built on service, now rewritten with purpose. Before bed, I opened my notebook and began a new piece. They called me a housemaid, but I was the rhythm beneath their feet. I was the meal and the memory, the quiet revolution wrapped in an apron. The pen didn't stop, because I knew finally fully this story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. There's a particular kind of silence that once defined my life. The kind that comes from being so necessary, so present, so dependable, that people forget to notice you entirely. They forget the folded towels, the meals timed to their hunger, the socks that always match the light bulbs that never flickered. They forget because they can. But silence has its own voice, and eventually it speaks. Mine did not through screams or ultimatums, but through stillness, through withdrawal, through a lesson written in undone chores and a vanished presence. It said, "See me or live without me." It said, "Respect is not retroactive, it must be practiced now." And remarkably, she listened. Brielle didn't just apologize, she evolved. She didn't just learn to cook, she learned to care. She didn't just see my work, she saw my worth. And me. I stepped out of the shadows. I picked up a pen. I told my story, not for revenge, but for remembrance. For every mother who once rocked a crying child at midnight, only to be dismissed as just staying home. For every woman whose labor became wallpaper in someone else's life. For every heart that wondered silently, will they ever understand what I gave? Let this be the answer, yes. But only when we stop giving everything without asking to be seen. Now I bake because I want to. I write because I must. And I live as someone no longer erased. Because I was never just a housemaid. I was the hearth, the hands, the history. And now I am the voice, the author, the beginning of something my daughter and maybe yours will never forget. The apron is hung. The story is not over. It has only just begun.